30-second board, hot topics in the sport. Now, the Troy Lee Designs race team made a splash at Anaheim 1, announcing they will be part of Ducati's upcoming factory race operation. Probably see that on the racetrack in 2026, but they're still coming to the races with a display bike. And then while they're there, they've put together a helmet collection, and not just of Troy Lee Designs riders, but all the top athletes in the pits. And they're going to use the helmets to create a fund and then donate that to the Red Cross for wildfire relief out there in Southern California. Here's Troy Lee himself with more on that.
Oh, we're just trying to take care of some of the people that have been involved in these really nasty fires, man, and just saying if we can get the top 10 helmets from the 250 and 450, I think we can bring some money, and that's what it's all about, just reaching out. And we sent them all gear bags to the people up there in LA last week, and then when I talked to Dave Prater, he said, I think it's a good idea. Let's see if we can pull this together. So my team's pulling it all together.
Yeah, that's a really great cause, and those people need all of the help they can get, and Troy really stepping up to help a great cause. Now, speaking of the racing, and a little bit less of a good feeling that we had, the rivalry between Haiden Deegan and Julien Beaumer is finally arrived. And we knew this was coming. You knew Haiden Deegan was going to find his form. And I've been so curious as to how Juju Beaumer would handle this, because Haiden wants to get in there and scrap it out and get the war of words going.
You pissed off the bull last week. Juju ran his mouth, so it's time to lock in. And you don't want to piss me off because I come out swinging.
And to Juju's credit, he has done such a great job of avoiding all that.
Yeah, qualifying was good this morning, and we got together in that heat race, and I went down as nothing too big, nothing to worry about, and got docked as well. So that didn't help my case, but got off to a good start, and he rode great. Hats off to him. He was a better man tonight, and we're going to get back to work.
He just said, you know what? Go ahead. You've been fantastic. You had a great night in Anaheim too, and it's going to be so much fun to watch how that plays out, where I think Haiden wants to antagonize Juju, and I think Juju is like, not going to play those games.
Okay, let's transition to the 450 class. Going back to Anaheim 2, gate picks are usually pretty obvious to figure out, but it rained during the 250 race and before the 450 main. So tell us how that impacted the proceedings.
Well, Haiden Deegan chose the gate on the outside, but right up against the tunnel. And it was a perfectly straight gate. And also remember how much room it gave him to his left. Once he clears that tunnel, he can start moving left, has really no impediment to get to that first corner. Well, Eli Tomac followed that gate pick. He saw how well it worked. Everything was perfect. But when it started raining, that particular rut that Tomac and Deegan had chosen was down to the base. It was really, really hard packed. When you add water to that, it becomes very, very slippery. And there's a great picture. You can go to Racetrack's online Instagram and see it. Chris Kiefer actually took it, but it shows how much wheel spin that Eli Tomac got, and he swung wildly to the left once he cleared that. And Tomac said as much after the race, that he thought he chose the right gate. It ended up being far too slippery to get a good drive. And in the end, if you wanted to look, why did Eli Tomac get a poor result? You don't need to look much further than that exact gate as to why it didn't go very well at A2 for Eli Tomac.
That's going to make Glendale pivotal for Tomac, who you might argue maybe he has been the best rider in the series over these 3 rounds, but he's tied with Lawrence in points, tied for third. That hurts. So he's got to get some back this weekend. Now back to the 250 class, kind of lucked out. We had teased this before the main event, how it looked like perhaps a podium sweep with teenagers was en route, and then that's exactly what happened, because the veteran Jordan Smith crashing late in the race opened the door for Cole Davies to get his first podium and join fellow teenagers Degan and Beaumer on the box. So pretty wild that this has worked out. This used to be normal, JT, but in this case it had not happened since 2011.
Yeah, I think we have to give a shout out to that SMX Next program. These kids are being developed early, and when they arrive to the Super Motocross World Championship stage, they seem more prepared. I don't believe that that's a coincidence that we haven't had that since 2011. These kids are ready. You look at Cole Davies, the improvement he made in a year. Julien Beaumer, 1 year prior, graduate of that. And we all forget about Haiden Deegan, was a graduate of this program also. And all these kids are ready to battle the veterans. So it's an interesting time. I think as we move east, maybe we'll get some more of the older old guard show up and start winning some races. But for this West Coast, it seems like the youth have gone wild a little bit.
And speaking of the youth movement in 250 Supercross, we're going to have our big interview here with Davey Millsaps, who is working as a coach and trainer for Julien Beaumer right now. But Davey, I first want to mention, I think you were 18 when you won a 250 Supercross title back in 06. So you've seen it on both sides. As far as Juju is concerned, just take us back. What was his program like, say 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago when you hooked up with him? This has been a very steep climb for him. What was it like back then when you first started?
Honestly, it was just over 2 years ago when he hired me, and he can maybe do 3 laps, honestly, fast laps, maybe between, I would give him 2 to 3 laps at max before he was shot. His first day that he hired me, I'm like, hey, what is your normal riding day like? So I have an understanding of what I'm in for. And he's like, oh, I do, 30, 40 laps, something like that. And I'm like, okay, cool. We'll start small. I had him do 30 laps and he couldn't barely move the next day. So I'm like, so that's not very much true on your part. But and we only did, small laps. I didn't have him do, big motos or anything like that, because it was just, I'm trying to see what he's doing. He had a race in 3 weeks at Anaheim too. So I'm trying to get some speed back in him and some consistency with that. But after that, it's he gave me 100%, and 2 years goes by and here we are.
So right now, obviously running the red plate, we're focused on how's he going to do this weekend at Glendale? Can he win the title this year? Is that necessarily where your focus is, or even his team's focus is? Or are you guys thinking, no, we're really just getting started here. Don't judge everything on 2025.
Obviously we want to win the title. That's everyone's goal, is to win the title. But I also feel like it's taking it week for week and seeing what we're learning from, week in and week out. He hasn't really got a podium. He didn't really get a podium last year. Charlotte was SMX, and then he comes out and he has a 2-1-2. That's huge for him. It's building his confidence. But yeah, still trying to keep him humble and keep him grounded. But I feel like the Glendale obviously being a hometown race for him, and then the rest of the season being East Coast and East West shootouts. I think he's just looking forward to the learning and having fun with it and seeing where it takes him. I personally would love to win a championship but I also feel like let's take it race by race. This is your second year racing Supercross, your second year being a pro. You're 18 years old. You don't have a lot of experience at all. Yeah, he has me in his corner with a lot of experience, but yet I'm not the one that's lining up on the gate. He is. So when that gate drops, what I tell him, go in here, just go whoop, out one side. So, so it's I think it's just trying to keep everything and tight knit and keep pushing and grinding, and where we end up at Salt Lake is where we end up, and we move forward to the next year no matter what it is.
My last thing, people are really enjoying this back and forth now that we've seen with Degan on the podium and then back and forth on social. Is this really a thing? Is this a thing that you guys are talking about, addressing, acknowledging? How are we going to deal with this? Or you guys just do your own thing? How important is that actually? Because on the outside, it looks like pure fire.
I mean, the thing is I don't know. I don't know what Haiden feels. I don't know what Brian's telling him or who's telling him. I know what Julien feels, and I know Julian's having fun with it. I think it's good for the sport. I think it's something that people love and are eating into. But I just love the fact that you have both the guys that will, talk mad crap to each other, but then when they're at the races, at the end of the race last weekend, high five or shook hands, whatever it was. They've been racing each other since they were 6 years old, and I think that's where the whole confusion was he said, I've been dealing with his antics. Well, yeah, because he does talk that way. He does talk mad crap. He does. That's just who he is, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the build-up between both of them is I think it's funny. I think it's great. I think they're both feeding off of it. I think that's something that this 250 class needs. It came in where it was Levi and Haiden. Now it's Julien and Haiden, and then you have, Jordan Smith lurking right there. I think it's something great. I don't mind it at all. I think that he's having fun with it, and I would love to see where the year takes it.
Okay, now let's go back to both classes as a whole, whether they be young riders or older riders. This is pretty neat. 3 different winners in 3 races in both classes, JT. So I don't know. We're going to go 4 deep as we go to Glendale?
Well, this is where we come in with the hashtag deep field conversation. But this is what we all were hoping for when you do all these preview shows and you talk about the season and you're daydreaming about what could be. We're getting all of that. The best riders, both young and old, are bringing their best stuff to the series in both classes. So what more do you really want? And I've said this for years, all you can really ask for is when the gate drops to not know who's going to win. And that is exactly what we've gotten this season.
If you want 4 different 450 winners to start the season, can you give me some names of who can be a 4th this weekend?
Yeah, I want to say Cooper Webb. I just don't think this track sets up well for him. Statistically, it's his worst racetrack on the schedule. It's a little bit too fast for what he does well. So yeah, I think a guy like Jason Anderson, I think a guy like Ken Roczen, both of them are on form. They've been on the podium already, and they're both historically very good at this particular racetrack, this type of dirt. And I think the Triple Crown will work for them as well because they're very good in shorter races. So those would be my 2. You take your pick as to who shows up and gets the win, but those are the dark horse winners for Glendale for me.
Yes, if you're a Ken Roczen fan and you're already pumped that he has the point lead, more good news could be en route because he's very good in this building, and we'll get to that with Clinton Fowler and our SMX facts later. But let's talk about what he's done so far. The beginning of the year, you often see oddball winners, oddball point leaders, because you're dealing with a short sample size, which can really swing the math in a variety of ways. But he has done something in these first 3 rounds that to me is very impressive. We know Roczen's great early in the races, but when he's bad, it shows late in the race. And all 3 rounds this year, JT, that hasn't happened. He has been just as good at the late laps as he's been in the beginning all year long. That's the real good news, I think, for a Roczen fan.
Yeah, there's really been nothing to criticize so far, but the questions will remain. Can he have the same form that he has in January? Can he maintain that March, April, and May? And for the last 7 years, it's been no. And that's the tough part. That's going to be the thing that he has to address when the time comes. There's nothing he can do about that right now other than show up and execute, which he's been doing. But that's still going to be the theme. When we get late in the series, we swing back west and the championship's on the line, what does that version of Ken Roczen look like? And we will have this conversation again on this very show, and we'll have more data to support it. But I think everybody is looking at the same thing, is this Kenny going to be that Kenny when it counts?
Now back to the 250 class. One interesting thing is that this will be the last West race for a couple of weeks, only 4 rounds, and then East will begin at the 5th race in Tampa. Normally West race is longer, but they also get a longer break after they race a bunch of rounds. So there's only a few weekends off, and they'll be back at Arlington. So specifically, for example, Joe Shimoda, he's been fighting through injury valiantly, but how much relief is he going to get? And also talk about Shimoda in a Triple Crown.
Yeah, I think for Shimoda, this couldn't come at a better time unless it already happened. He really just needs time off the motorcycle. We'll see if he has any sort of surgical procedure during the break, but rest and recovery, that's the name of the game for Joe Shimoda, getting back to where he can ride aggressively. But I'll give you 2 other names that it's a very important round for, and that's Julien Beaumer and Haiden Deegan. The sentiment leaving Glendale, who's looking over at who thinking I've got the upper hand, is going to be very, very important, because I think if Deegan goes out and wins again, it's only going to cement what he thought he already knew, is that I'm the guy, I'm supposed to be winning, and this is the way it's going to go when we come back to racing. But if Beaumer goes out at what you would say is his home race, he's from Lake Havasu, and sends a message back to Haiden Deegan, they're like, yeah, you had a great race, but I'm still the points leader for a reason. I've been the best guy through 4 races, and I just showed you again at a Triple Crown. That's a huge thing that Haiden Deegan's going to have to stew on for the next few weeks. So again, we started off the show talking about that race within a race between these two. This is going to be a very critical juncture in the mind games that go on over the next month before we see them again.
And what makes it even more fun is the Triple Crown format. First time we've seen it in 2025. We'll show you exactly how it works. It's 3 shorter races for each class. And that's what's going to be the key, having to nail 3 starts and be consistent throughout the night. So Triple Crown Racing, and by the way, Deegan has been inconsistent with starts this year, as an example. So of many of the 450 riders, what are you thinking about when you hear Triple Crown with the dynamic that we've already set up?
Well, it is a different type of race. If your starts haven't been exactly where you want, it puts more pressure on you. And quite frankly, Beaumer's nailed it every single time, and Deegan's been all over the map with his start. So I think it puts a little bit more pressure on Haiden to get those starts perfectly right. But I think, when you think about the 450 class as well, you get a little bit more of the average. You don't have to go out and put all this pressure on one particular event. As long as you're there every single time, your odds of doing well ramp dramatically. And I'll give you an example. Last year, Cooper Webb wins Anaheim 2 Triple Crown with a 2.25 score. That's almost never going to get you a win in any type of competition, but that's what the Triple Crown events bring. There's a lot of chaos, variance, and if you're there every time, you might end up at the top, but no matter what, you're going to end up with a strong points haul leaving Glendale.
Triple Crown's been around a few years now, and here's something we've learned. It's about consistency, but also not. One of the interesting things at the end of the night, if you crash out of a normal Supercross main event, you're going to finish last, next to last, and take a huge hit in points. We've seen multiple times where a rider has 2 decent finishes, crashes out of a race, and still gets 8th overall or 9th overall, and the amount of damage is essentially cut in half. So that's something else to watch this weekend. A lot of times the Triple Crown has ended and you look and you're like, how did he get 7th? Well, a 2-3-20 can get it done. So SMX Next, which is the program a lot of fans knew as SX Futures, now the whole SMX Next program encompassing both what we call Futures races in Supercross and what we called the Moto Combine races in Pro Motocross. We got a bunch of those races coming up throughout the calendar year, and Glendale is the first. One thing I want to remind everyone of, this is not a points-paying championship. The national title in the Supercross side is handed out just with the results at the Pittsburgh round coming up in April. And then the 3 Pro Motocross races, those are standalone. The idea here really is to build experience for the riders more than putting an emphasis on gathering points or getting results. JT, you already said it. We're seeing all that experience pay off for riders like Degan and Beaumer and Cole Davies who have come through this program before. I'm going to run down a couple of names to watch for this weekend. Caden Dudney, who is now part of the Monster Energy Yamaha Star Racing team. Watch him. Landon Gordon, Landon Gibson, don't confuse them, they're both fast. Caden Manier, who has now moved also to Star Racing Yamaha. Liam Aloff, Luke Fauser. Those are the names we think will be good, but we didn't have Juju on the radar 2 years ago, and he quickly got on it, so we don't know exactly what to expect.
Yeah, and I think for myself, I'm going to have to really pay attention to these riders and think about their pro career outside of this SMX Next event, because if we've learned anything, we've learned that these kids are pretty close to ready to make the jump. You look at the 250 West class, it's filled with graduates from the last couple of years. So I'm going to be kind of seeing who's ready to take that step. I think maybe it's Manier and Dudney. Those kids have really shown a lot of promise when they've been on this stage before and at other amateur national events. But it's getting fun to watch these kids develop, because I always thought they were further away than they are. The Deegans and the Davies and the Beaumers have really kind of changed the narrative for what these SMX Next events mean.
And what's changed the narrative for this weekend is that Drew Adams would have been the favorite, but he got the call up. Monster Pro Circuit Kawasaki lost so many riders, he ended up racing and racing well at Anaheim 2, so he'll be racing again in the 250 class at Glendale, maybe opening the door up for some of these other riders to become the next Cole Davies, the next Drew Adams. And this is the track that they will be battling on. Hey, JT, I always say the riders say we like long rhythms and 180 turns. Look at this racetrack.
Yeah, it's always one of the fastest layouts of the season because you see how big the floor is. So that gives them more room to work with. And then when you correlate that to the results, what does Eli Tomac do well? Really high-speed racetracks where he can use his skill set. You think about a track like Charlotte last year, very similar type layout, really fast, lots of straight line stuff. So watch for Tomac to do really well. The other note I'll make here is that whoop section, there's a lot of speed that's going to be gained coming into those. So the riders that like to blitz whoops with a lot of speed are going to excel in those sections. Think Ken Roczen, think Chase Sexton, think Jet Lawrence. Those guys all love to grab a gear and let it rip coming into those whoops, where a guy like Cooper Webb, it doesn't work as well for him. Justin Cooper doesn't work as well. They want to find a rhythm through there, and entry speed is not their thing. So those little subtleties that can show up in the results are something to watch for this weekend.
Yes, heading to Glendale. Let's show you where and when you can watch. Everything broadcasting live on Peacock and the SMX Video Pass if you're outside the United States. Race Day Live begins at 2:30 Saturday afternoon. That's Eastern time. And racing begins at 8 Eastern Saturday night. JT, you really can't get a much better scenario than this. Chaos in the first 3 rounds, and then throw in a Triple Crown and a racetrack that holds a lot of promise.
Hi folks, Lee Diffie from NBC Sports here. If you truly enjoyed what you just watched, you can get more news, interviews, and highlights by subscribing to the Motorsports on NBC YouTube page. You can get it all, so go for it.